Welcome to Planet Geo, the podcast where we talk about our amazing planet, how it works, and why it matters to you. Well, hey, Chris, speaking of turkeys, Long Valley Caldera. Terrible segue.
Not a good transition. That was terrible.
How do we go from turkeys to Long Valley Caldera? Let's see. A swarm. Talking about a big swarm of stuff, we have a big swarm of stuff happening at Long Valley Caldera recently, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's a good transition.
Jesse,
hey, give me a compliment. That was not too bad.
Well, let's turn to that first image that you have playing there right now. And this, I like this. You did a really good job with it. The first green line just shows the amount of uplift that's happened in the Resurgent Dome in the last 30 or 40 years. Okay. And we're talking about like 83 centimeters of uplift. And so, first of all, Jesse, we should define what a resurgent dome is, and then we'll start talking about what this means.
Let me skip ahead here, Chris, to this image so that you can here. We showed this in a previous episode, but outlines the resurgent dome in green here. It's not the entire caldera; it's a small part of the caldera. But what's a resurgent dome broadly when we're talking about calderas?
The resurgent dome is, you had this caldera forming event, and the caldera collapsed down in 2 kilometers, which is just shocking. This would have been
it's amazing.
A very, very cool thing to witness.
Oh,
and
my
to,
goodness.
Like as long as you're in a hot air balloon, that'd probably be the best.
Yeah, not on the ground.
If you want to survive the event. But, so it collapses down in, and this caldera then has a roof. But then you get fresh injections or pressure that causes it to like swell up. And one of these areas, it's a resurgent dome because the name is self-explaining. It's beginning to grow outward from that roof again, kind of like a big blister inside the caldera proper.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, that's a good analogy, Chris. And some of the eruptive units, I think they're called the early rhyolite is one of them that's after the caldera forming eruption, but erupted, the volcano doesn't just shut off after the big eruption. It kind of still burps and gurgles and spits stuff out, and that stuff can form in part this resurgent dome. That definitely happened, but that happened a long time ago. The big eruption was 761,000 years ago. Within the next 100 to 150, 175,000 years, there was some resurgence. There was a lot of resurgence. Actually, most of the resurgence, most of the topography we see today in the Resurgent Dome was that uplift. Then it was pretty quiet, and now, Chris, back to this chart, we're showing uplift. You said 83 centimeters, so this is an old chart that only goes to 2006. There has been uplift since then, but really this kind of started kicking off in the late 70s, this new sort of renewed uplift, and we're only talking about 80 centimeters here. It's enough to measure and enough to get us a little worried and start thinking about what's going on, but it's not the resurgence like you were referring to, this late stage resurgence. That happened a long time ago. This is new and something we maybe don't know what's going on. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about this episode is what's the cause of resurgence. It also correlates with earthquakes. The other 2 diagrams on here are just showing it corresponds to the other y-axis, the right-hand y-axis. It just shows the cumulative number of earthquakes in the caldera in the yellow line and in the Sierra Nevadas regionally or locally in the orange line. And basically the point is that when these lines go vertical, we have a lot of earthquakes in a short amount of time. When they go horizontal, it means we don't have very many earthquakes in a long period of time. And so these periods where we have a lot of earthquakes correlate with periods of rapid uplift. And I don't know, Chris, just looking at this by eye, the correlation's kind of nice. I mean, it overlaps pretty well.
That's a beautiful correlation, actually. That's amazing. That this resurgence definitely has something to do. It's related to seismic activity also.
That's right.
Now,
seismic
what's
activity.
Causing what? That's kind of what this episode is all about. Is this because of magma moving up? Is it something else going on? That's what we're really going to dive into the weeds on with this episode. But
so, Chris, let me. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I recently went to a lecture in downtown Grand Rapids, and one of the leading volcanologists in Iceland is Dr. Thor Thordarson. He gave a talk in Grand Rapids at the community college, and he was doing something really similar to this. He was looking at past eruptions, has been super active recently and
in Iceland,
correlating it with seismic.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Very cool.
And he was looking at like real time data, and he said he was so confident. He said that by the time I get back, this system will be erupting again. And
wow, really?
Sure enough, it was.
That's awesome.
Yeah. 2 days later, it began another spectacular eruption. So this was back in late November. Yeah.
Okay. And a similar thing happened in the Hawaiian, what ended up being quite destructive Hawaiian eruptions several years ago now, where there's this uplift and earthquake swarm, and this sent a bunch of warning flags off to the volcanologists and to the local communities. But Chris, I want you to lean into old man Bullhuis right now, and I want you to bring us back to the 1980s. And 1985, let's say, there's a bunch of resurgence in uplift and earthquakes happening in the Long Valley Caldera. And between this period between 1980 and 1990, the earthquakes were actually getting shallower. So, with earthquakes, we can kind of tell where they're occurring at depth. And they're going from 8 to 4 kilometers window to more like a 6 to 2 kilometers window. So they're getting shallower with time. In that time period, what are we thinking about this uplift earthquake combination here in Long Valley Caldera?
Yeah, I think the knee-jerk reaction is, what causes uplift, and everybody rightfully, I think, starts thinking about magma. Is magma pushing its way up? Is magma becoming shallower, which is going to bulge up the rocks into resurgence? Is that what's happening? And there's reason for that. I mean, you look at 1980 with Mount St. Helens. On the north-facing slope, there was I don't know how to, it's not a zit. It's maybe a zit on steroids. It's a boil growing off the northern flank of,
I like that. That's good. Okay.
This bulge of rock on the north facing slope of St. Helens was a real concern. And then that's ultimately, it bulged out to the point where it was beyond the angle of repose, and, earthquake, kind of just like jostled it loose and it slid down, and that was like taking the cap off the champagne bottle. I mean, it was it erupted out of that, and so I think bulging on the inside of a volcano is cause for concern, and you start to think about magma, rightfully so. I mean, it had just happened recently, and actually, Jesse, we got it wrong with St. Helens, and that was a part of the thought here too in the 1980s, the early 80s, because they didn't forecast the direction of Mount St. Helens. They didn't forecast the size of the eruption. And that was on everybody's mind then when you start to think of Mammoth Mountain in the 1980s.
So this is really nice. I think that's a beautiful framing. So why would this be concerning, right? Well, I think it's obvious. If Mount St. Helens just happened, if we kind of know, and we can look at Iceland, we can look at Hawaii, when magma's moving, things are happening, uplift happens, then earthquakes happen, and that can lead to eruption. That's not necessarily the case, and it's not the prevailing model now for Long Valley Caldera specifically, because there's some really fundamental differences between the volcanic systems in Iceland, Hawaii, and Long Valley Caldera, and actually Mount St. Helens too. Very different than Long Valley Caldera. And there's kind of two competing viewpoints on this, and they're really boiled down to, is there new magma stuff happening down below, or is it just the last gasps of a dying magma chamber that's doing all of this stuff? And we're going to kind of try and simplify those down to two end member arguments. The answer's somewhere in the middle, maybe, but we got to kind of talk about what this might be. So you talked about moving magma, very obvious one. I think that makes intuitive sense. Magma moves shallower, causes earthquakes, causes uplift, could be the signs of a potential eruption. Yeah, but not necessarily.
And then you start to think about, like, all right, let's go ahead and test this hypothesis then. If this is magma, what do we want to do? If we had unlimited resources, what would we want to do? I think I'd probably want to go to the top of the Resurgent Dome and bore a hole.
Yeah.
Let's see where this magma is.
Exactly.
Let's go.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they did.
That's
right?
Exactly what they did. It was part of, I think, Chris, it was part of a Department of Energy funded thing because there's geothermal power plant in this area. So looking for geothermal energy, which is just hot rock down beneath our feet, is one really good goal. And then I think it was also a second part of drilling. I don't know the full history of this, but I think it was supported by the Intercontinental drilling program or something like that, where we drill into continents. You could propose scientific reasons for drilling into continental crust or oceanic crust, depending upon which funding stream. I actually had a colleague who proposed to drill a hole into a kimberlite to get a record of these ancient lake deposits that fall. They end up creating really small, stable deep lakes where kimberlites used to erupt.
Wow,
so
that's
if you go
really
to a
cool.
55 million year Earth kimberlite eruption, you have this beautiful lake record sitting in the bottom of that well. So they're going to drill through the sediment and then drill into the kimberlite, and there's big interdisciplinary reasons to do that. I don't think they ended up doing it, but it's this type of program that
Okay. Did they have any like relation to the mining of diamonds then? This
I think it was,
project,
I mean, maybe there was some part of that. I think it was more of like, how do kimberlites form? What's the magma of kimberlites? That was kind of the questions they were answering, which the mining company is interested in, but I don't think they were looking for diamonds necessarily. So,
okay. Well, anyway, we digress. Let's get back on topic
They did
here,
this,
Jesse.
and they did this, Chris, at the top of the Resurgent Dome, which, again, we've highlighted here, which makes sense. There's hydrothermal fields, there's geothermal fields all around the edge of this. Let's go in the middle. It's where there's resurgence. Let's see what's down there. And the result was very interesting and not at all scary. It was when you get to
put that image on there, Jesse. Go to the next image.
The image, okay.
There we go.
So you drill down 3 kilometers is where they got, and the temperature was only 100 degrees centigrade, just over 100 degrees centigrade. So you could boil water with it, but not much more than that.
And that's really, really important. First of all,
why is it surprising, Chris, or why is it reassuring? Maybe is the right word. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way of putting it. I don't know. Well, 103 degrees at that depth, at 3 kilometers, that's just the normal geothermal gradient. So if we had magma that was shallow, it's going to be hotter then at that depth, right? Even if the magma chamber's below that, it's so big, the radiant heat from that is going to cause all the rocks in the surrounding area to be much hotter than 103 degrees, right?
Yeah.
And so this was, I think, really important in us taking another look at this. Well, okay, what else may be causing this resurgence then if it doesn't appear to be magma moving up closer to the surface?
I think that's really, I just want to sort of, focus in on that point you just made, Chris, that when you take magma and you move it up to shallow depths, like this image is showing, magma forms deep, it moves up shallow, that magma's hot and it's bringing heat up. You can think of it like this is a way to get heat out of the earth, is magma migrating upwards. Hot magma, 850, 900 degrees, 1200 degrees magma moves up. It brings all that heat up, and when it stalls, it starts to dump that heat into the crust around it. It starts to cool off, and that heat goes into the rocks around it. So it kind of heats up the whole area. Now, if we go back to this map, there's a geothermal power plant. There's Hot Creek right next door to this Resurgent Dome where we drilled into the Resurgent Dome, and we know it's normal geothermal gradient. Like 100 degrees at 3 kilometers depth is not that different from Pennsylvania or Michigan. It's like it's nothing out of the ordinary. Why is that? How could that possibly be? If there's a magma chamber down there, it's more likely everything's going to be hot. The way you can get kind of hot spots is by using water to circulate stuff through. So if you have water going down, cold water going down one side, picks up heat down in the crust and then brings it up another side, another vent. It's very localized heating that can happen when you have hydrothermal systems, right?
Yep.
Whereas a big magma body sitting down there is going to heat up everything around it. So that was the first indication that maybe this is not magma, or really one of the early indications that maybe this is not magma, and then there's some geological evidence backing that up. So the question then that you're posed was, what else could it possibly be? And that's a great question, right? What could it possibly be?
Well, one of the leading ideas.
Yes, I would say that. Yep, that's good.
Is that this is what's called the second boiling, which automatically begs the question. You should, if you don't know anything about this, then you're like, well, all right, what's the first boiling then, guys? Let's go.
Yeah.
So
there we go.
Let's talk Chris, about the first boiling.
Yeah, take it away. You touched on this last episode with your flask analogy, and you do this every year when you go to Yellowstone. You talk about geyser eruption. You talk about first boiling. Effectively, this is just applied to magmas now. So how does it work?
Right. I think that's the difference. We're talking about now magma, and magma has a lot of volatiles in it. And volatiles are just dissolved gases. It's got water, carbon dioxide, H2S, SO2, a bunch of other things. Those are just collectively referred to as the volatiles that are in magma. But they're under pressure, and so they're contained in the magma. Now, if that magma moves up closer to the surface, it's going to boil off those volatiles. They're going to escape. And it's like opening up a 20-ounce bottle of soda, right? You crack the top, it goes like that, and all of a sudden bubbles appear, right? And they were there. The carbon dioxide was dissolved in the pop or in the soda until you release the pressure, and then all of a sudden they escape out and they essentially boil off, right?
Yeah,
that's the first.
And Chris,
boiling.
That is such an important mechanism for big eruptions or any eruptions really. As soon as you pop that top off, you can visualize it kind of simply. Let's say you have a magma chamber. Magma chambers are rarely just very simple, big round balls in the earth that we talk about. They're disaggregated. You pop the top a little bit at the top level one. That part boils off. All those gases kind of explode up the vent. That decreases pressure beneath it as well, which then can also undergo first boiling, and all that gas explodes into the vapor phase, brings up magma. The explosion can kind of become this positive feedback loop, and just the whole magma chamber goes until you reach a point where the pressure, or really the magma, runs out of gas so that it can't explosively erupt anymore. It can't decompressively blow up anymore. So that's first boiling. Really important, really basic principle of volcanic eruptions, of magmatic rocks in general. Second boiling, in this diagram we're just showing a geothermal gradient. You bring magma up to the surface and you can decompress it, right? With the same water content, we'll touch on this later, the same amount of water in a magma, it can become unstable as you go to lower pressures. So you depressurize it and it can suddenly not fit in the magma anymore. So what is second boiling? That begs the question. I'm going to go to this image here, Chris. We're zooming in on a dying magma chamber here, and this is a really common process that's well known in the pegmatite literature. The last pegmatites are kind of thought of as the last dregs of magma chambers, right? Like all the stuff that doesn't fit goes into the
you
last...
and I are a huge fan of pegmatites.
Huge fan of pegmatites. Yeah, exactly. They grow beautiful minerals. They're beautiful rocks. Yes. They're incredible because all the weird stuff doesn't fit in these things. All the major minerals in a rock, quartz, feldspar, biotite, amphibole, they don't like all the stuff that ends up in pegmatites. So pegmatites are a great resource. They also are places where there's a lot of volatiles around because volatiles do not fit in minerals. So here we're zooming in on a dying magma chamber and we're saying, okay, we're down at depth. The minerals are crystallizing. This eruption has happened. This stuff didn't erupt. It's sitting around there. It's cooling off. The cooling means crystallizing. The crystals are growing, and as the crystals grow, eventually it gets locked in place. If you grow enough crystals, 50%, 60%, then the magma, the whole chamber can't move. It's kind of solidly in place, and it's just going to sit there until it dies, a slow cooling death. What happens is if you crystallize 50% of the magma, that magma, 100% of the magma had 100% of the volatiles in it. Now, none of the volatiles go in minerals. The minerals don't like these volatiles. And so now you have 50% of the magma that has 100% of the volatiles. And if you play that forward, you end up with 90% of the minerals, and only the 10% remaining melt has 100% of the volatiles in it. So the concentration has gotten enriched. It's gotten distilled.
It's super saturated. That's right.
And you can you can drive it to saturation and beyond saturation. And let's just put some numbers on this. Way back in 1958, Tuttle and Bowen mapped this out. In rhyolite, 3 to 4 kilometers deep in the crust, you can fit about 4 weight percent water in it. When you go down deeper, 10 to 12 kilometers, you can fit about 8% water in it. Now, that initial magma probably did not have 8% water in it. It probably had, something like 2 or 3 or 4. But as you crystallize this down, the last remaining bit can go above that 8%. When you go above that 8%, that gas has to go somewhere. It's not happy in the magma, and it can undergo this second boiling. It doesn't explode. It boils off all the volatiles, and all the volatiles kind of go out together. And it won't just go out together. You'll lose, if you build up to 9% water, 1% will leave, the other 8% will be happy there. Then you crystallize a little bit more and you bleed off a little bit more. It's more like a pressure release valve, Chris. Like the pressure release valve makes sure you don't have an explosion. It's just little bits of boiling off constantly anytime you get above the saturation.
That's right. And those volatiles then are going to rise up toward the surface.
Yes,
and that is what can cause resurgence.
That's right. That is the second boiling model for this uplift. Is that no? Actually, this isn't magma. This isn't something really interesting, exciting, perhaps dramatic happening in the magma chamber. This is just the natural outcome of a dying magma chamber. All those volatiles eventually have to go somewhere. They're coming up into the hydrothermal systems. It's magmatic water water from a magma that was formerly in the magma that interacts with groundwater. It's heating it up, and we're doing hydrothermal stuff to drive this seismicity, drive this uplift. It's not about the magma chamber. It's not about more magma coming in. It's not about magma moving up. It's about water moving up, or volatiles moving up.
Because Jesse, like, and I think we need to bring this point in, is that if it were magma, then you would need fresh injection of magma to keep the system going.
That's a good point. That brings us really nicely. Can we move to the kind of seismic imaging? Because as you outlined really nicely, this is one model. The second boiling is kind of one. Maybe it's the dominant model. I wouldn't say it's consensus model, but it is a major model. There are arguments for melt being in place down below, and they come down to seismology. So, okay, we talk about P and S waves in our intro level classes. What's the valuable difference? Here's just a typical seismogram. P is primary, it arrives first. S is secondary, it arrives second. But what's the difference? What's the useful difference between these two waves?
Yeah, the useful difference is that in our classes, we often will talk about the idealized version of a magma chamber, where you have this volcanic system and you have this balloon-shaped chamber below, and it's all just liquid, right? Well, that doesn't bear out with seismic data, because the P waves, which are the primary waves, are the fastest. They're essentially just sound waves. They can travel through solids, liquids, and gases. But the secondary waves, which are the S waves, they can't. These are shearing waves, and liquids don't have any shear strength. So this is how we know what the liquid outer core is. We know where it is. We know that it's liquid based upon this kind of shadow zone that you get, the absence of S waves that have to travel through the liquid outer core to get to their end destination. But we don't get that with volcanoes. You don't get these magma chambers. S waves will travel through that hypothesized chamber of magma down there. So that means it has to be mostly solid.
It has to be mostly solid. And we visualize this as a magma mush. It's mostly solid, interlocking crystals that are grown together with a little bit of melt around them. And the debate is really how much melt. Is there a lot of melt or a very little amount of melt? So S waves, when they travel through that type of material, a magma mush, we generally think that they slow down. So they don't get blocked, but they slow down. And there's been a couple papers in the last decade, thinking of Flinders et al. 2018 one, that showed a 15% on average slowdown rate in a potential magma chamber beneath the Long Valley Caldera. So the S waves are slowing down by up to 15% in this area, which means that there might be magma in there mixed in with the crystals. It might be a magma mush network. And
well,
Chris,
hold on. Can I interrupt you, sir? Because Jesse, in my mind, there has to be magma there yet, because we have not talked about this younger magmatic system. When you think about Long Valley, you have two magmatic systems. You have the system that is below the Long Valley Caldera proper. What about, though, this north-south chain of volcanic mountains that extends from Mammoth Mountain? And we're talking about the Mono Inyo Crater's volcanic chain. Really.
Yeah, so we're kind of
goes all the way up. It culminates at Mono Lake.
Yeah, we're kind of catching the tail south part of it right here in the caldera. In this topography, you can see this really nicely. There's these little round hills that go all the way up north, and this is just the southern tail of it, basically. But yeah, you're exactly right, Chris. So what's the story with these? What's going on here?
I mean, it's really kind of a cool story. You've in the last 50,000 years, you've had all kinds of eruptions they're smaller scale, but they're still kind of impressive. In fact, and like I said, have you ever been up to Mono Lake, Jesse?
No, not to Mono Lake. No.
We haven't talked about that.
I haven't,
okay.
No.
Jesse, in the last 50,000 years is when this all began, and it's the last time an eruption happened from this volcanic chain was 250 years ago, which is this island called Paoha in the middle of Mono Lake. 250 years ago. So during the last 3,000 years, this chain, there have been eruptions kind of regularly from 750 years, every 750 to 250 years, with the last one being 250 years ago.
I mean, amazing. So clear evidence.
There
has to be, right? Clear evidence that there is magma down there. It's just, I think, a question of scale. Like, what is it? Is it something big happening in the big magma chamber that could lead to a big eruption? Or is it little stuff that's kind of unrelated, or maybe little dregs and kind of different, different system altogether, right?
Yeah. Well, they think of these as two separate magma that does not like, there's no magma mixing going on.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a really
These are
interesting
two
point.
separate systems.
It's actually quite hard to mix black rock and white rock, black magma and white magma, basalt and rhyolite, and get andesite. Like, they're very different rheologies. It's oil and water,
oil and water,
bit, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really hard to get those to mix actually. So that's a topic for another time. But the idea that melt exists in this lower magma chamber could you're right, be related to the Moneno chain, in that what if there's basaltic magma coming up from the mantle, hitting the Long Valley Caldera magma chamber and reactivating that, right? And then that's moving up. So if we go back to this S-wave velocity reduction thing, it's like kind of 15 on average, or maximum 15% slower. What does that mean for amount of melt? We know it's not 100% melt, but it could be up to 23% melt. And there's a lot of like give in that model, because you have to understand the size of the magma chamber, and you're talking about a single wave that goes along a path, and you're detecting a signal along that path, like an integrated signal. So it gets a little bit tough. But what we know is, Chris, the Long Valley Caldera system, 750,000 years ago, 761,000 years ago, that system could not remain molten for 750,000 years. It would have cooled off thermally. It just could not have remained.
Thermodynamics,
yeah. It would have cooled off a long time ago. So if there's 23% melt down there, then it has to be new melt injection, which could correlate to the eruption time, 90,000 years, 80,000 years eruption time of the volcanic chain, headed north. So this is kind of one idea that maybe there's some interesting stuff going on with the S waves here, and we can play games comparing the P wave velocities to the S wave velocities and tell something about the system.
Yeah, but I don't think either one of these ideas are exclusive of the other, right?
No, I think that's right. I think there could be multiple processes going on. It's probably, we've kind of painting them as end member scenarios a little bit, focusing on the uplift, like what's causing the uplift. The most recent thing,
Jesse,
Chris,
that leads us to this kind of culminating thing, which is a really cool research that I have almost zero experience with this or knowledge of this actually, but it's so exciting. This fiber optics thing. This is.
Well, I have a slightly little bit more than zero experience with it, but there's like graduate students in our department who do this. I'm not a geophysicist. I'm just always consistently blown away by the techniques that they have at their disposal. Like, talking to Diana Roman is so exciting because they just have so many cool tools to play with. This is a new one, a very cool one, distributed acoustic sensing. This has been done as early or as recently as 2023, a Bondi 2023 Science Advances paper that talks about this. It's super interesting. Basically what happens, can I run through this just briefly, Chris? What kind of things going on here?
Well, I'm going to keep a tight leash on you. So let's,
all right, fair enough. We'll keep it tight.
What's the takeaway with DAS?
The takeaway with DAS is we're using fiber optic cables as a seismometer, as a bunch of seismometers, basically. So you have a fiber optic cable that's running through the ground or on top of the ground, and you pass a laser pulse goes down it, and the physics of the fiber optic material are such that if it's strained, that light will get scattered, what's called the Rayleigh backscatter. And the light gets scattered, and some of that scattered light heads back towards your what's called an interrogator, the thing that sent out a laser pulse. You detect it back. You can calculate how far away that strain is. And so you can actually watch that strain move along the fiber optic cable. So just to put some numbers on this study I referred to in 2023, they collected for 12 months on a single 100-kilometer long fiber optic cable. They got 6,000.
100-kilometer long?
100-kilometer long cable that they're collecting data along. And you kind of imagine that's like a bunch of seismometers, basically. The fiber optic cable is behaving like seismometers. For 12 months, they detected 6,000 local and regional earthquakes. Of those earthquakes, they didn't just detect 6,000 PNS wave arrival times. They detected 12 million PNS wave arrival times, because for each earthquake, they get the strain as it's kind of moving along, right? It's just amazing.
Wow. So, Jesse, that is really, really important, because in geophysics, through traditional methods, the problem is getting data points, getting enough data, right?
Enough coverage. It's I think Diana Roman calls it, converging ray paths. So if you have an earthquake here and a seismometer there, you're only going to detect one wave from that earthquake that hits that particular seismometer. I mean, you get more than that, but you're going to go get one P wave and one S wave. So you want as many seismometers and as many earthquakes as possible. And so this technique kind of allows you to synthetically have a bunch of seismometers out there that collect different ray paths, different P and S waves as they're hitting they're traversing different parts of the crust. So you get more coverage, more density, a more detailed view of what's in the subsurface.
Man, my mind goes right away to, is this going to lead to earthquake predictive science? This kind of technology that we're talking about here.
I think that a lot of people working on that from various aspects for sure. And it's just this is one of those techniques you kind of, I don't know the details here, but I look at it and I'm sort of like, wow, that seems like there's very few downsides. Like this just seems better.
Okay, hold on. So the takeaway, Jesse, is that what they found, what they think on this is that there is a magma chamber deep down, but it's kind of got this rind around it, like maybe you think of it as a lid that has prevented it from migrating upward. And so, in other words, this is very confirming or parallel to the second boiling hypothesis.
That's right. They would, in their modeling, they've suggested that they have imaged the deeper magma chamber and then this rind and then a gap and then a little bit of shallow stuff that's likely hydrothermal. So I think what their argument is that this is actually validating the second boiling hypothesis, because we see the old fossil dying magma chamber down below. It's got this rind, this thick crystallized rind around it, and that's preventing magma from moving up at all. But hydrothermal fluids can fracture. This second boiling process can happen and break through the fractures there, and this water can kind of leak out and get into the hydrothermal system, cause the uplift, cause the earthquakes. And there's some interesting seismology of, tracking groundwater, like snow melt events, and then tracking the seismology. And people can look at the physics of particular earthquakes and kind of understand, is this related to groundwater? Is this related to magma? Is it buildup of strain? What's causing the earthquake? And so I think it's looking like it's much more of a hydrothermal process that's driving the resurgence and the seismicity, a la the second boiling hypothesis, as opposed to a lot of magma moving up and a worrying amount of magma moving up maybe. So
yeah, Jesse, this is an interesting way of, I've never heard it called this before, second boiling, but it's a principle that actually happens quite often in geoscience. And like you said, the very important pegmatites. I've never heard it called that before, but I like it.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a nice turn of phrase. I like it a lot. Second boiling. And like I said, this is the book. It's still an open book. We're still don't know what's going on. I think it's a couple hypotheses. Maybe a dominant one is second boiling. I wouldn't say it's consensus view, but it's certainly something you will read about Long Valley. And there's a discussion. And I think Chris, this was a fun episode just because we got to showcase the range of tools that volcanologists have at their disposal, from geochemical arguments, geological arguments, geophysical things, new cutting-edge geophysical techniques, and first principles petrology going back to Tuttle and Bowen, 1958. It's just a really rich scientific discipline that I can understand why people want to become volcanologists. Volcanologists are the marine biologists of our world, right? Like,
they are. Absolutely. It's our version of swimming with the dolphins.
Yeah, exactly right. I get it. It's a compelling field. You have a lot of tools and fun tools at your disposal. So I don't know. What do you think? Have we done this justice?
I hope so. This was, this turned into a monumental project for us, actually. The Long Valley Caldera. Yeah. It was an idea I had a long time ago, and I'm like, yeah, let's do Long Valley Caldera. And you start diving into this, and the complexity of it is, it's awesome. I had a lot of fun doing this. We have one more to go yet, Jesse, because we're going to interview an expert in this, and I can't wait great for that. But this was fun, and I hope we did it justice.
I think so too.
Just the right amount of weeds. I mean, we went down a lot of rabbit holes,
Yeah, I know. But it's good to do that. And I think we did. We also got to talk about a lot of fundamentals about volcanoes and fundamental stuff through the lens of the Long Valley Caldera. So you can find this episode, if you're listening on the podcast, find this episode with all the images on our CampGeo mobile app. first link in your show notes. Give that a click, or just type CampGeo into your app store on your mobile device. You can find us on all the social medias at Planet Geocast. Send us an email, planetgeocast@gmail.com. And if you would, give us a like, subscribe, and a follow on whatever platform you're following us on. And give us a rating. 5 stars would be great. Leave us a rating and leave us a comment if you're on Spotify or YouTube.
Cheers.
Peace.